It was supposed to be the happiest night of her year. Candles, laughter, friends gathered to celebrate another chapter of life. But before sunrise, 29-year-old Hannah Lewis would be found brutally murdered in her own apartment, still wearing the dress she'd chosen for her birthday. The scene was gruesome, but what truly stunned detectives wasn't how she died. It was who killed her, because the fingerprints found on the knife didn't belong to a stranger. They belonged to her best friend, the woman who had planned her party, hugged her that night, and then ended her life. What could drive one friend to turn so violently on another? Jealousy? Betrayal? Or something far darker? This is a story of a friendship that turned fatal, a woman who never saw the knife coming, and a birthday that became the day everyone would remember for the wrong reason. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story will take twists you won't see coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's start. Hannah Lewis has spent the entire week counting down to her 29th birthday. Her apartment was spotless, the decorations perfectly arranged, and a soft golden glow spilled from strings of fairy lights she'd hung across her living room. A playlist of her favorite songs filled the air, and for a while, everything felt right. Friends trickled in carrying gifts and bottles of wine, and the room buzzed with the easy joy of people who had known each other for years. At the center of it all stood Hannah, bright-eyed, radiant, dressed in a deep emerald dress that shimmered under the lights. She greeted everyone with hugs and laughter, her energy infectious. Among the guests was Sophie Grant, Hannah's best friend since college. The two had been inseparable for nearly a decade, roommates, travel partners, sisters in all but blood. Sophie had organized much of the evening. The cake, the guest list, the surprise slideshow of old photos that played quietly in the background. To anyone watching, she looked like the perfect friend, helpful, affectionate, proud to see Hannah happy. But underneath the smiles, something between them had shifted. Hannah's new promotion at work had created a quiet distance Sophie didn't want to admit existed. Where Sophie was struggling to keep her job, Hannah seemed to be thriving. New clothes, a growing social circle, and an engagement ring soon rumored to be on the way. Sophie smiled through it all, but her eyes sometimes lingered too long. That night, Hannah raised her glass to toast her guests. To old friends, she said, grinning at Sophie, and to the best one I could ever ask for. The room erupted in cheers, but Sophie's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Later, as the party thinned, Hannah and Sophie stood together on a balcony, the cool air wrapping around them. "You okay?" Hannah asked softly. "You've been quiet tonight." Sophie shrugged. "Just tired. You know how it is." "Don't disappear on me," Hannah teased. "We've made it this far. We'll make it through everything." Sophie laughed faintly. "Yeah, through everything." Downstairs, a neighbor later remembered seeing them together. Two silhouettes leaning close on the balcony light, the sound of distant music and laughter echoing from above. No one could have guessed that just hours later, one of those women would be gone. As midnight approached, Sophie insisted on helping Hannah clean up. Most of the guests had already left. The cake sat half-eaten on the counter, the wine bottles empty. The night had turned quiet. Neighbors reported hearing faint music, then a sharp noise, something metallic, a crash, maybe even a scream, but by morning it was silence that ruled the apartment. When police arrived the next day, balloons still floated in the corner, birthday candles half melted on the table. And at the center of it all, lying on the floor beside the toppled wine glass, was Hannah Lewis, her blood staining the carpet beneath the words written on the wall in red lipstick. "Some gifts cost too much." The morning sun spilled through the blinds of apartment 4B, cutting across the mess of last night's celebration. Glitter, paper plates, and wilted balloons cast eerie reflections on the floor. What had been a place of laughter just hours earlier now felt like a crime scene frozen in time. It was Emily, Hannah's co-worker, who first realized something was wrong. Hannah never missed her morning video call, not once in the 3 years they'd worked together. When calls and texts went unanswered, Emily drove to her apartment, her gut twisting with worry. She arrived just after 10 a.m. The front door was unlocked. "Hannah!" Emily called out, stepping inside. The faint scent of wine and frosting still lingered. She took a few steps further, then froze. On the floor, just beyond the kitchen island, lay Hannah Lewis motionless, her dark hair fanned across the tile, her emerald dress rumpled and stained deep crimson. One heel was missing. Nearby, a broken wine glass glittered like ice. Emily screamed. Within minutes, sirens filled the quiet street. Neighbors peeked from their windows, murmuring and clutching their robes as police cars surrounded the building. Yellow tape went up, and the hum of radios replaced the sound of music that had once filled the air. Detective Laura Crane, a veteran of the department homicide unit, ducked under the tape and stepped into the apartment. She'd seen death in all its forms, but birthday decorations always made it worse. "No one deserves to die under balloons," she muttered. Her eyes swept the room. The chaos of celebration, the lipstick message smeared across the wall, the overturned wine bottle beside the body. The words read, "Some gifts cost too much." It looked theatrical, personal. As the coroner's team worked silently, Laura noticed a photo frame cracked on the counter. It was a picture of Hannah and another woman, laughing together, arms wrapped around each other, champagne flutes raised. "Who's this?" Laura asked, showing the picture to Emily. "That's Sophie," Emily whispered. "Her best friend. She threw the party." Within an hour, Sophie Grant arrived at the scene, still in the same dress from last night. Her hair was messy, her eyes swollen from crying, or pretending to cry. She broke past the officers, screaming Hannah's name. Detective Crane stopped her gently. "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. We'll talk soon." Sophie collapsed onto the couch, trembling. I left around 1, she stammered. She said she was tired. I thought she went to bed. Who could have done this? Laura watched her carefully. Her hands shook, but her eyes flicked around the room too quickly, taking inventory, calculating. "Did she have enemies?" the detective asked. Sophie shook her head. Everyone loved her. Everyone. Laura's pen stopped. Everyone. It was always the same answer, the same lie. Outside, reporters were already gathering. The story was too perfect for headlines. Teacher found dead after birthday party. As Sophie was escorted out for questioning, a gust of wind caught one of the half-deflated balloons, sending it floating lazily toward the open door. On it, written in marker by someone the night before, were the words, "Best friends forever." Detective Crane watched it drift out onto the street, her stomach sinking. She didn't believe in coincidences, and she never trusted best friends. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly in the small gray interrogation room. Sophie sat at the metal table, her trembling hands folded in front of her, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The birthday dress she still wore, a glittering navy fabric, looked out of place under the harsh, sterile lighting. Across from her, Detective Laura Crane flipped through a folder filled with photos. Hannah's apartment, the wine glass shards, the smudged lipstick writing on the wall. "Some gifts cost too much." "Take your time," Laura said calmly, her voice firm but not unkind. "I just need you to walk me through last night. Start from the beginning." Sophie nodded, her eyes distant. "We've been planning the party for weeks. Just a few close friends. Nothing big. She turned 30, you know? We ordered her favorite cake. Strawberry with vanilla frosting. We laughed. We danced. We drank a little too much. Everyone left around midnight. I stayed back to help clean up." Laura leaned forward slightly. "Everyone? Who exactly was there?" Sophie listed names. Colleagues, an ex-boyfriend who just showed up, and a neighbor who'd come by with champagne. But as she spoke, Laura noticed her skipping over one person mentioned in text recovered from Hannah's phone. A name that came up more than once in recent weeks, Ethan. "Ethan?" Laura interrupted. "You didn't mention him. Who is he?" Sophie froze for a fraction of a second. Ethan's her co-worker. He couldn't make it." But Laura knew that wasn't true. There was security footage from a nearby building showing Ethan arriving with a small wrap box just before 10 p.m. She was seeing him, wasn't she? Laura pressed gently, romantically. Sophie's lip quivered. "Maybe. She said it wasn't serious." "Did that bother you?" Sophie's head snapped up. "What? No, of course not. Why would it?" Laura didn't answer. She simply flipped to a photo of Hannah and Sophie, taken at last night's party. They were smiling, arms around each other. But Sophie's eyes were trained not on the camera, but on Hannah. Watching her, Laura let the silence sit heavy between them before asking, "When was the last time you saw her alive?" Sophie swallowed hard. "Just after 1. I left. She said she was going to bed." The detective's gaze sharpened, yet neighbors reported hearing raised voices at around 1:20. A woman's voice yelling, "You lied to me. You sure you left at 1?" Sophie's eyes darted to the floor. Maybe I was still outside. Maybe she was on the phone with someone else. Laura leaned back, studying her. "You loved her, didn't you?" Sophie's face went pale. "Of course I did. But not the way she loved you." Sophie's breath hitched, just once, almost imperceptibly. The door opened, breaking the tension. An officer stepped in and whispered something to Laura, sliding a piece of paper across the table. Laura's eyes flicked down. "Fingerprint match, wine bottle, Sophie Grant." Laura closed the folder. "That's all for now, Ms. Grant. Don't leave town." Sophie stood shakily. "Am I a suspect?" Laura met her gaze. "Right now, everyone is." As Sophie was escorted out, Laura watched a reflection in the one-way glass. The glittering dress, the trembling hands, the fractured expression. It wasn't guilt that Laura saw. It was obsession. And somewhere between love and envy, something had snapped. Detective Laura Crane sat alone in her office, the early morning light slanting through half-closed blinds. The air was heavy with the scent of stale coffee and paper. She had been replaying Sophie's interview in her head all night. Each hesitation, every misplaced word, the way Sophie's voice cracked when Ethan's name was mentioned. She opened a new file on her computer. Victim, Hannah Lee, age 30. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. Estimated time, between 1:15 a.m. and 1:40 a.m. Laura's eyes narrowed. Sophie said she left at 1 o'clock, but cell tower pings from her phone placed her near Hannah's apartment at 1:28. That was lie number 1. Across town, Ethan sat in his car outside the station, wringing his hands. He'd been called in for questioning that morning. When he finally entered the interrogation room, Laura saw a man who looked more broken than guilty. Eyes hollow, face drawn, shoulders slumped. "I didn't kill her," he said immediately. "I swear to God, I loved her." Laura's voice was calm. "Then help me understand what happened between you and Hannah, and what Sophie Grant had to do with it." Ethan hesitated. "Sophie? She was Hannah's best friend, but she hated that we were together, said it would ruin everything. I thought she was just being protective." He paused. "But lately, Hannah said she was scared of her." Laura leaned forward. "Scared how?" She said Sophie had started showing up at her place unannounced, going through her stuff. Once, Hannah came home to find Sophie sitting in her kitchen, just sitting there in the dark. Laura felt a chill crawl up her spine. Did Hannah tell anyone else? She wanted to, but Sophie had something on her, something from their past. Hannah said if she told anyone, Sophie would ruin her life. That was when the first crack in the perfect friendship began to show. Later that afternoon, Laura and her partner, Detective Ruiz, returned to Hannah's apartment for another search. They combed through her bedroom, her closet, her phone records. Then Ruiz found something, a small velvet jewelry box hidden beneath a pile of clothes. Inside was a silver locket. It contained 2 photos, one of Hannah, one of Sophie. On the back, engraved words read, "Forever us, no one else." Laura felt a knot form in her chest. "Ruiz," she said quietly. "This wasn't just friendship." Ruiz looked at her, eyes widening. "You think they were involved?" Laura didn't answer. Instead, she picked up a torn piece of paper found in the same drawer. It looked like part of a handwritten letter. Only one line was legible. "You promised me it would always be us. Then you brought him in." That was lie number 2. Back at the precinct, Laura pinned the letter fragment beside the crime scene photos. The pieces were beginning to align: jealousy, betrayal, obsession. But the timeline still didn't fit. Sophie had lied about leaving, but there was no murder weapon yet. No witnesses placing her inside after midnight. As Laura studied the board, Ruiz entered holding a small evidence bag. Inside was a wine bottle, wrapped carefully in plastic. "Lab just confirmed it," he said. "Hannah's fingerprints and Sophie's. No one else's." Laura nodded slowly, the realization dawning on her. The same bottle that was used to toast Hannah's birthday might have been the one that ended her life. And the person who raised that glass in celebration might have been the same one who swung it in rage. Outside, storm clouds began to gather, the first low rumble of thunder echoing in the distance. Because as the lies unraveled, the truth was about to strike. By the following morning, Sophie Grant's perfect composure had begun to crack. She hadn't slept. Her phone buzzed endlessly with texts from reporters, co-workers, and friends demanding answers. The police had released Hannah's name to press, and when it came to first whispers, rumors of jealousy, betrayal, and a friendship turned sour, Sophie stood in her bathroom, staring into the mirror. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hands trembling as she tried to apply mascara. "Hold it together," she whispered to herself. "You didn't do anything wrong." But even she didn't believe it anymore. At the police station, Detective Laura Crane wasn't convinced by Sophie's story. She'd seen too many women who looked fragile, but hid something monstrous beneath the surface. And Sophie's calm, collected demeanor didn't match the chaos of the evidence piling up. Laura spread the crime scene photos across the table, her gaze lingering on a half-eaten birthday cake, the smashed wine bottle, and the blood spatter pattern that told a story of rage, not panic. Ruiz walked in with a file. "You're gonna want to see this," he said grimly. Inside were financial records. Sophie had recently withdrawn $10,000 in cash. 2 days before Hannah's death, she told detectives it was to help her mother with medical bills. But when Laura called the mother's number, she discovered something chilling. Mrs. Grant had died 3 years ago. That was lie number 3. Meanwhile, Sophie sat home, wine glass in hand, her nerves shredded. Her doorbell rang, and she jumped. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there, pale, disheveled, and angry. "You did this," he hissed. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" He held up a photo. It was one of the last pictures taken that night, a blurry image from another guest's phone showing Hannah laughing. Sophie's all around her, and Ethan standing behind them, looking away. "They think I killed her," Ethan said. "The police, the neighbors, everyone, because of you." Sophie's heart pounded. "Ethan, please, I didn't." But Ethan stepped closer, his voice breaking. "She told me you couldn't handle it, that you've been watching us, following us. I didn't believe her, not until now." For the first time, Sophie felt real fear, not from Ethan, but from the truth pressing against her chest. The walls she'd built to protect her lies were collapsing. "Leave," she whispered. "Just leave." Ethan didn't move. "Tell me the truth, Sophie. Did you hurt her?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her silence said enough. Later that night, Sophie drove aimlessly through the rain, the city lights smearing across her windshield. She ended up in front of the school where she and Hannah had worked together, where their friendship had blossomed, and where, perhaps, the first seeds of resentment were planted. She parked and stared at the dark building. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw a flicker of light, a security guard making rounds. But for a moment, she imagined Hannah there, smiling, waiting for her as she used to. Sophie gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. "You were supposed to love me," she muttered through gritted teeth. Her reflection in the mirror was unrecognizable now. The guilt, the loneliness, the lies. They had twisted her into something else. Back at the precinct, Laura stared at the evidence board. Every thread led back to Sophie, but there was still something missing. A trigger, a spark that turned envy into murder. Then Ruiz entered, holding a manila envelope. "We pulled deleted texts from Hannah's phone," he said. "You want to read these?" Laura scanned the messages, her pulse quickening. The final one from Sophie read, "You can't keep pretending he means more to you than I do. We'll talk tonight. Just us." The timestamp was 1:05 a.m., minutes before Hannah was killed. Laura closed the file slowly. It's time we bring Sophie Grant back in. Outside, dawn was breaking. But for Sophie, the darkness was only beginning to close in. The room was colder this time. Or maybe it just felt that way. Sophie sat at the metal table again, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale but defiant. She wasn't a composed, teary-eyed friend from her first statement. Now, she looked cornered. Detective Laura Crane entered with quiet precision, followed by Ruiz, who carried a thick file. Neither spoke as they took their seats. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Sophie's throat tightened. Laura finally broke it. "Thank you for coming back in, Ms. Grant." Her tone was even, but beneath it was steel. Sophie forced a small smile. "Of course. I want to help however I can." Laura didn't respond. She opened a file and began laying out photos one by one. Images of the living room, the birthday cake, the broken wine bottle, Hannah's phone, the blood patterns. Sophie's eyes darted over them, then quickly away. Laura slid another paper across the table. "This is a record of your bank withdrawals. You took out $10,000 2 days before Hannah's death. You told us it was for your mother's medical bills." Sophie hesitated, her breath hitching. "Yes, she's sick. She needed..." Laura interrupted softly. "Your mother passed away 3 years ago." The air went dead. Even Ruiz stopped taking notes. Sophie's jaw clenched. "That's not relevant," she snapped. "Oh, I think it is," Laura replied. "Because that means you lied to us, Sophie. And that makes me wonder what else you've been lying about." The mask Sophie had so carefully worn began to slip. Her fingers tapped the table, a nervous rhythm. "You don't understand. People were saying things about me, about Ethan and me. Hannah was... She was trying to take everything away." Laura leaned forward. "Take what away?" Sophie's eyes flickered. "My life, my reputation, everything I built." Ruiz spoke up, his voice calm but sharp. "You texted her at 1:05 a.m., asking to talk. That's the last message she ever received. You said, 'You can't keep pretending he means more to you than I do.' What did you mean by that?" "I didn't mean anything by it." Sophie blurted, louder than she intended. "It was just, I wanted to clear the air." "Clear the air?" Laura echoed. "Or confront her?" Sophie stood abruptly. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this." Laura remained seated. "Sit down, Sophie." Her voice was low, commanding. "We're not done." Sophie froze, trembling. She sank back into the chair, her breath ragged. Tears welled in her eyes, but Laura saw no remorse in them, only panic. "You went to her house that night," Laura said quietly. "Didn't you?" Sophie didn't answer. "You argued," Laura continued. "Maybe she said something that pushed you too far. Maybe she told you she didn't want to see you anymore. And then..." "Stop," Sophie screamed. "You don't know what happened." The room fell silent again. Laura didn't move. She didn't have to. Sophie's reaction spoke volumes. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaking. "I just wanted her to listen." She wouldn't. She kept saying I was obsessed, that I needed help. Laura's tone softened just slightly. "And that made you angry?" Sophie's breathing grew heavier. "You weren't there. You don't know how she looked at me. Like I was nothing. Like she was better than me. After everything I did for her." Tears streamed down her face now. She said she was going to tell Ethan everything. That I'd been following them. She said she was done with me. Laura let the silence sit before asking, "What did you do then, Sophie?" Sophie looked down at her hands, trembling violently. "I just wanted her to stop screaming," she whispered. Ruiz exchanged a look with Laura. They didn't need a confession. It was already there, in the cracks of every word. Laura leaned forward one last time. "Sophie, did you kill Hannah?" Sophie lifted her tear-streaked face. "She left me no choice," she murmured. And just like that, the silence broke, shattering the illusion Sophie had tried so hard to keep. Outside, cameras flashed as word spread that the police had a suspect in custody. Inside, Laura closed the file, her chest heavy. The truth was out, but it didn't feel like victory. It never did. Because even now, she couldn't shake the image of two young women who had once been inseparable until love, envy, and loneliness turned friendship into something fatal. The rain outside beat softly against the windows of the interrogation room, a slow and steady rhythm that seemed to echo the pulse of guilt in the air. Sophie sat slumped forward, her eyes red, her hands trembling against the cold steel table. Gone was the composure, the defiance, the mask she had worn for so long. What remained was a woman stripped of denial, teetering between grief and madness. Detective Laura Crane sat across from her in silence. She knew not to rush this. Confessions weren't forced. They spilled out when a person could no longer hold their own truth inside. Ruiz stood in the corner, recorder blinking red, capturing every fragile second. Sophie's voice came out hoarse, almost unrecognizable. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Laura leaned forward. "Tell me what happened, Sophie." Sophie's fingers tightened into fists. She called me that afternoon. Said she didn't want me at the party. Said it was just for close friends. Can you believe that? After everything I did for her? She gave a hollow laugh. I got her that job. I helped her study for her exams when she could barely sleep. And suddenly, I wasn't a close friend anymore. Her gaze turned distant. I went anyway. I told myself I'd drop off the gift and leave. I waited until most people had gone. I saw her through the window. She was smiling, talking to Ethan, looking so damn happy, like she'd already erased me. Laura said nothing. She just let the words come. I knocked, Sophie continued, her voice cracking. She looked surprised, but she let me in. I thought, maybe we could fix it. But she was cold. She said I'd been acting strange, that I was making her uncomfortable. She said she'd been keeping her distance for a reason. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes, but her expression twisted with something darker than sadness. She said I was jealous, that I needed to move on. She didn't get it. I wasn't jealous. I just needed her. She was my person. Her words hung in the air, fragile and warped all at once. Laura's tone was gentle. What happened next? Sophie looked down, unable to meet her eyes. She asked me to leave. She said Ethan was coming back soon. I told her I didn't care. I told her she couldn't just erase me like I didn't exist. Her breathing grew shallow. We argued. I don't even remember what I said. She kept telling me to calm down. Then she reached for her phone, maybe to call him. I grabbed her wrist. Her voice broke completely. She pulled away and hit me. I didn't even think. I just reacted. She covered her face with both hands. There was a wine bottle on the counter. I swung it. Once. Just once. I didn't mean to. I swear I didn't mean to. The words dissolved into sobs. Laura closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. It was always the same. Rage, impulse, regret, the irreversible line between them. When Sophie spoke again, her voice was small, almost childlike. She fell. I tried to wake her up. There was so much blood. I panicked. I wanted to call someone, but I couldn't. I wiped everything I could reach and left. Ruiz looked away, jaw tight. Laura asked quietly, "Why did you lie about the text, Sophie? Why pretend you didn't go?" Sophie wiped her tears with shaking hands. Because I didn't want to believe it was real. If I didn't say it, maybe it didn't happen. I thought I could just forget. Silence filled the room again. The only sound was the hum of the overhead light and Sophie's uneven breaths. Laura finally stood, her voice steady but heavy. "Sophie Grant, you're under arrest for the murder of Hannah Pierce." Sophie didn't resist. She didn't move at all. As the cuffs clicked around her wrists, she whispered, almost to herself, "She was my best friend." Laura's throat tightened, and that's what makes it unforgivable. As they led Sophie away, the rain outside grew heavier, as if the sky itself was mourning what friendship had become, a mirror of love twisted by envy until it broke beyond repair. The news broke before dawn. Local teacher's murder solved. Best friend confesses. Those words rippled through the small town like a thunderclap. By the time the morning bell rang at Crestwood High, everyone knew. Hallways buzzed with whispers. Teachers gathered in the staff room, faces pale, voices trembling. Hannah Pierce, their friend, their colleague, had been gone for weeks, but now the truth made her absence unbearable. And Sophie Grant, the woman who'd shared lesson plans with her, lunches, laughter, was the one who took her life. At Hannah's family home, her parents sat at the kitchen table, the TV muted but looping the same headline. Her mother's hand shook as she held Hannah's favorite mug, still cracked from the morning they bought it at a yard sale years ago. Her father, stowed for too long, finally broke down. She trusted that girl, he said, voice breaking. She trusted her. The house felt emptier than ever. Every photo of Hannah smiling was now a relic of betrayal, a reminder that even love, even friendship, can turn lethal when poisoned by obsession. At the precinct, Detective Laura Crane watched the rain streak across her office window. The case was over, but closure felt hollow. She flipped through the file. Photos of Hannah, transcript of Sophie's confession, the coroner's report. Every page carried the same quiet tragedy, a friendship that had once been beautiful, slowly warped into something monstrous. Ruiz entered the room and placed 2 mugs of coffee on her desk. "You did good work, Crane. At least the family gets answers." Laura shook her head. "Answers don't heal. They just stop the bleeding." She closed the file and stared into the distance. "You know what gets me, Ruiz? They started out inseparable. Somewhere along the line, love turned into control. Admiration turned into resentment. That's what happens when someone mistakes attachment for belonging." Ruiz sighed. "You've seen it before." "Too many times," Laura said quietly. "But it never gets easier." Across town, the school board held a candlelight vigil for Hannah. Hundreds gathered, students, teachers, parents. They stood shoulder to shoulder, the soft glow of candles reflecting in wet eyes. A group of students released white balloons into the night sky, each tagged with note of love. As they rose into the air, Melissa, one of Hannah's closest students, whispered through tears. She always believed in people, even when they didn't deserve it. The crowd bowed their heads. The sound of soft sobs carried through the cold wind. And miles away in a county jail, Sophie sat in her cell, her mind a storm of guilt and disbelief. The walls seemed to whisper Hannah's name back at her, over and over. She had replayed that night 1,000 times in her head. The argument, the swing, the silence. She thought she could live with what she'd done. But the human heart doesn't forget its sins. That evening, Laura visited the cemetery. She stood by Hannah's grave, the earth still fresh, and placed a single lily on the soil. "She thought you were her best friend," Laura whispered. She never saw it coming. Lightning flickered on the horizon. Laura looked up, eyes cold but sorrowful. She never deserved this. The wind picked up, scattering leaves around her feet, carrying away the final echoes of a friendship destroyed. As she turned to leave, Laura made herself a silent promise. She would tell this story, not as a tale of death, but as a warning, because somewhere out there, another friendship might already be crossing that same invisible line. The courtroom was silent, heavy with the kind of tension that feels alive, breathing, pulsing between the walls. Hannah's family sat in the first row, faces pale but unflinching. Her mother clutched a photo of her daughter, one taken on her last birthday, the same night she'd been killed. In the picture, Hannah's smile glowed with warmth and light, her eyes soft with joy. It was a cruel contrast to the grim scene now unfolding before them. Sophie Grant was led into the courtroom in shackles. She looked smaller than anyone remembered, her once bright hair tied back, her face drawn and hollow. For months she had waited in jail, replaying that night again and again, trapped in a loop of guilt and self-loathing. But now, as she faced a family she had shattered, the reality of what she'd done seemed to crush her entirely. Detective Laura Crane sat at the back of the courtroom, a silent observer. She had seen dozens of trials, but this one was different. This wasn't a monster in human skin. This was an ordinary woman, a teacher, a friend, who had stepped into darkness and never found her way back. The prosecution's voice cut through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a story of sudden rage. It's a story of betrayal, of jealousy masked as friendship, of a slow-burning resentment that ended in murder." They laid out the evidence piece by piece. The deleted texts, the surveillance footage of Sophie's car that night, the DNA traces on the broken necklace found near Hannah's body, and then the confession, the quiet, shaking voice on the recording saying, "I didn't mean to, I just wanted her to stop." Each word stabbed through the courtroom like a knife. When Sophie's defense finally stood, the argument was simple. Sophie Grant is not a cold-blooded killer. She was a woman pushed past the edge by rejection, by mental health struggles, by a desperate fear of being left behind. But no justification could touch the emptiness in Hannah's mother's eyes. When it was Sophie's turn to speak, she stood trembling, her voice breaking before she could even form words. "I loved her," she said finally, her voice shaking. "I never wanted to hurt her. She was everything good in my life. I lost control. I wanted to make her listen, to make her stay." A sob rippled through the courtroom. Her words, meant as remorse, only deepened the tragedy. Love had never been Sophie's crime. It was her twisted, desperate need to own it that had destroyed them both. When the verdict came, the room held its breath. Guilty of second-degree murder. Sentenced to 35 years in prison. Sophie's knees buckled as the words hit her. She didn't look at anyone, not the judge, not her attorney, not even the family she had betrayed. But Hannah's mother rose, tears streaming, and whispered toward her, "You didn't just take her life, you took ours too." Sophie turned away, sobbing quietly as the guards let her out. Outside, the media swarmed the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted. But Laura Crane stood apart, watching the chaos fade into the afternoon sun. The verdict had brought justice, yes, but justice was never clean. She thought of Hannah's laughter, the way she used to make her students feel seen, loved. And then she thought of Sophie, trapped by her own broken heart. Two women, one friendship, one unforgivable moment. As Laura walked her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a story about murder. It was a story about loneliness, about what happens when love curdles into obsession and silence festers into rage. She looked up at the courthouse, steps one last time. "This never had to happen," she whispered. The wind carried her words away, but the truth lingered, raw, haunting and all too human. Years passed, but in the town of Maplewood, the memory of Hannah Price never faded. The school where she had once taught still carried her laughter in its halls, the kind that lifted even the quietest child out of their shell. Her old classroom had been turned into a reading corner, filled with sunlight and books she once loved. A small brass plaque sat by the door, in memory of Hannah Price, a teacher who saw the best in everyone. Every year, on her birthday, her students, now grown, would gather in the courtyard to lay fresh flowers beneath the tree she used to sit under during recess. Some brought their children, introducing them to the woman who had once taught them kindness and patience. They didn't talk about how she died. They talked about how she lived. For her family, the pain never truly went away. But over time, it changed shape. It softened around the edges. They started a scholarship in her name, one that helped young teachers chase the same dream Hannah had loved so fiercely. "Let her legacy teach forever," her mother had said, and so it did. Detective Laura Crane visited the memorial every year. The case had left a scar on her, a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a monster's face. Sometimes it looks like friendship, like trust, like love that turns the wrong way. She often wondered if there had been a moment, a single heartbeat, where Sophie Grant could have chosen differently, where she might have stepped back from the edge, because Sophie was still alive, in a women's correctional facility 100 miles away. Sophie spent her days in silence. Prison had aged her, but it had also stripped her bare. She taught art classes to other inmates. Painting, sketching, anything to keep her hands busy. One day, she painted a field of wildflowers beneath a wide blue sky. When an officer asked who it was for, she simply said, "For her." The guard said she rarely spoke of Hannah anymore, but when she did, her voice always trembled with the weight of something she could never undo. "I thought I loved her," she once told a counselor, "but love isn't supposed to destroy." Outside those walls, the world moved on. The town healed. The story became something parents told their children about trust, jealousy, and the danger of letting envy take root. Yet every so often, someone would glance at Hannah's photo on the memorial wall, the one taken on her last birthday, hours before everything went wrong, and wonder what might have been if Sophie had just chosen grace instead of rage. Laura often replayed that same thought as she stood by the memorial tree. She placed a single daisy at its base and whispered, "You're still changing lives, Hannah." Even now, the wind rustled the leaves as if in reply. In the end, the story of Hannah Price wasn't just about betrayal or murder. It was about the fragile line between love and obsession, about the choices that can turn affection into tragedy, and the strength of those who carry on after the storm. Because though Hannah's life ended on her birthday, her light didn't. It lived in every child she taught, every heart she touched, and every person who learned through her story that even in the darkest endings, compassion can still find a way to rise.